mental health doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anybody and anytime.
Hi, I'm Shoma Chaudhury. Thanks for watching Inquiry. On this episode, I'd like to draw attention to a very urgent issue of mental health. Of course, Diwali season may not seem the most intuitive time to be doing this, but Sushant Singh Rajput and most recently, the student from LSR who took her own life are symptoms of a much wider phenomenon, a spectrum of mental health issues that millions of people are trying to deal with. The statistics are staggering. And COVID has only intensified this mental landscape. We'd be surprised how many people around us are struggling with this and we don't even know. So I'm really pleased to have with me on this episode Neerja Birla, who's the chairman of the Aditya Birla Education Trust, and through her foundation Empower has been trying to flag this issue of mental health across age groups and across strata of society. Thanks very much for being with us, Neerja.
Thank you so much, Shoma. Wonderful to be here with you, talking and having a nice, long, candid conversation.
No, thank you. So, Neerja, I'm not sure how people are familiar with the statistics. It's quite scary that 1 in 4 children between 13 to 15 in India have depression. 150 million people in India need active intervention. And an area that you're trying to raise attention on, which is corporate mental health, 1 in almost 2 people face depression. But before I draw you into that wider landscape, I was really interested to know what got you interested in the whole issue of mental health, and why did you get into it in such a big way?
So, I have been looking after 2 schools now since the last 10, 11 years. One has seen a lot of issues that children, parents deal with and face. So that was leading me towards Empower. And then my own personal experiences, my daughter had her tryst with mental illness. So I think all of that put together, I think it was just it was something that was lurking in the back alleys of my mind, something that I really wanted to do. One night during one of our 3 a.m. conversations, Ananya and I were just talking about it. And she said, Mom, this is something that we've been wanting to do since a really long time. You've been wanting to do it. Why don't you just do it? And next morning, just made a few calls and just, got into it absolutely head on.
You just mentioned Ananya, and I'm going to come to that. But I believe before that, you yourself had depression. Can you speak about that? What was that experience?
So, I went through postpartum depression after both my pregnancies, the earlier 2 ones. And first time around, actually, I just didn't know what had hit me. Obviously, that was ridden with such feelings of guilt because it's a time when you're supposed to be happy, your daughter is just born. And I just couldn't understand why I was feeling so low and overwhelmed. It's only much later that I realized that there is something called postpartum depression. It's a very normal thing. It is a physiological thing. So I just feel that, had I known at that point in time that there's something like that does happen, it would have just made it so much easier for me to cope with. Because just the second time around, I was already so much better prepared. Similarly, I think if one is aware about mental health and, what are you supposed to do? When is it a red flag? When do you seek professional help? How do you cope with it? And that ultimately it's okay. It's really not so this thing that you have to be ashamed about it. Each one of us has a right to lead a fulfilled life. And something like a mental health illness is so debilitating. One doesn't realize it from the outside because it is you don't see it, right? It's not like a physical ailment. It's not a fracture. There's no way to measure it in terms of actual objectively, there's no way to measure it. There are no numbers that come with it. Mm-hmm. So one doesn't see it. And because you don't see it, you don't realize how it can impact you and your family. If there are ways and means of actually feeling better, which there are, then I think one must avail of it.
You just mentioned about the physiological aspect of it, Neerja, and I want to bring you back to that, so that people can understand what are just triggers and what are physiological, sort of just a chronic condition which can be chemically helped. But before that, Amir Khan's daughter, Ira, she recently came out as well to say that she'd struggled with depression for 4 years and she's really young. And it was very interesting because her Instagram post, she ended with saying that the first question I want to address is like, why me, right? Like, I'm a rich kid, I'm Amir Khan's daughter, why should I suffer? So people typically have that response. You just mentioned that Ananya had to deal with it as well. Would you share what her trigger was?
No, I mean, mental health, this is a huge misconception that there is, that which is something that we have to deal with, is that mental health doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anybody and anytime, irrespective of gender, obviously economic strata, age. And that's exactly what Ira is also talking about, right? Because, I mean, it's such a misconception that we all have. I mean, why anybody else? We ourselves also used to feel that way, right? That how can it happen to one of us? I mean, high achievers think like that all the time, that why should it happen to me? Because, here you are, sort of fully in control, so successful on your professional side. And the minute you have a mental health illness, you look at it as a personal failing. Having a mental health illness is not a personal failing. It is a physiological change in the mechanics and the chemical structuring of the brain. And that's why you land up with it. Of course, there are many different triggers. I mean, one could be, of course, genetic disposition. And then, of course, there are environmental triggers and everything. So it's everything put together that can lead you to these chemical imbalances that can happen in the brain. So therefore, it has nothing to do with, with having resources or not having resources. It really sort of equalizes. It's an equalizer.
So, this thing I was just saying about the fact of, when does a family member or anyone, your friends even, or you yourself, know that this is time to seek intervention? What are the things to watch out for? Like, how do you know when it is something where you should just put yourself together and it's something that you can deal with, or something which is needing the help of a counselor or a therapist or a psychotherapist? When did you know as a mother that, okay, this is now out of my control and I need to seek help?
I mean, I don't really remember at what point that happened. But obviously when sort of, you're not feeling well consistently over, a couple of weeks or months, then you realize that, there is that nothing that you are doing is actually helping the situation, right? And also what happens is, you may, how sometimes people feel that, okay, go for a walk and you'll feel better, or go out and you'll feel better. So, I mean, obviously you try everything, under the sun, because nobody wants to not feel better. So you do try everything. But even if you change your environment, you start doing different things or stop doing things, nothing really seems to make you feel better. You still have that, that hollow feeling. You still have that low feeling. You still feel that, you really don't just feel like doing anything. You're just feeling probably tired all the time, or not sleeping, or oversleeping. So I think I mean, these are things that really are part of everyday life. So we're all on a spectrum. But I think when it sort of comes in the way of your daily living is when you realize that it's a red flag and it needs professional help. Or there are times when you suddenly feel very overwhelmed. You can't just deal with simple things in life also. Something very simple can just overwhelm you so much and completely throw you off. And then you're left wondering, what just happened? Did my reaction or my response, did the situation really elicit such a response? That's when the awareness comes in, that this is not right. It comes to you that something was not right here.
Right. Just so that anyone watching this will also see the range, you just mentioned that sense. One is the sense of protracted inability to cope. Could it be that you're not wanting to meet friends, or you're in bed, or, can you kind of spell out some typical symptoms? Now you've been working with this for a while. So,
typically, I mean, not getting out of bed is a very, something that a lot of people face. It can happen once, twice, thrice. But then you realize that it's just really tough getting out of bed every single morning. And, for somebody who is not going through it, one realizes that you don't realize that something as simple as getting out of bed can be such a chore for that person. So often I've had, friends telling me that, for their children, that, that he or she just doesn't want to get out of bed. Or what do I do? Just doesn't want to come out. Just doesn't want to meet anybody. And they'll end up, getting irritated with their child, which is when you really need to think that the child is not doing it out of some, because he's really enjoying it. I'm sure nobody enjoys being in bed for such extended periods, but it's sort of a cry for help. It's so much easier just to be in bed. You don't have to deal with any emotions. You don't have to deal with any people. You don't have to deal with anything that's coming at you. You're feeling so overwhelmed with your own emotions that you can't deal with anybody else's emotions, or with, any one comment from somebody else can be a trigger.
When we were speaking earlier about this, about having resources, about, being overtly successful or wealthy, when you went through it, and that was quite a while back, when there was even less conversation about this, was there a person or was there a conversation with someone? Like typically, how can help come, before you seek it? So in your case, was there any one person or book or something that helped you understand what you were going through?
No,
or did you just fix yourself?
Yeah, I just literally fixed myself. Again, whether it was stigma or whatever it was, or even there was so much guilt, right, that you don't even want to tell anybody that, I'm just feeling
I'm not over the moon. Yeah.
I'm not over, so you're so ashamed about it, right? So you don't want to talk about it. But so both my husband and I used to, wonder what's happening. And of course, I mean, he was very supportive, and, I passed it. And then once I knew what it was, the next time around, it just became so much easier. Now, of course, there's a lot of help available, which just makes so much sense, because it just makes the journey that much more palatable. You got to go through what you go through. You don't have a choice. But it's just that it just becomes that much more easier to go through with it.
Neerja, we've had this really high-profile attention around Sushant Singh Rajput's suicide, and one can now speak of it as suicide because it's been investigated. But what was your takeaway from the way, the noise that surrounded that death?
I feel that in that whole noise that was created about him, without going into, the rights and the wrongs, I think that in that whole noise, the fact that he actually was suffering actually got lost. What is it that he really felt? Why did he do something as drastic as that? I mean, obviously he was suffering. He was going through some major trauma. There were things that, he couldn't cope with. And therefore he did what he did. I mean, taking your own life by suicide is a very, very, it's a very strong step, right? I mean, it's very drastic. So I think that in that whole noise, what he went through, I think got completely lost. And I think we didn't respect that bit enough.
So we were talking about teenage depression. I actually got interested in this issue, and even to wanting to speak with you was when I realized through friends of my children and my sons that they're young girls in that age of 13 to 14 who were really talking about depression, self-harm, low self-esteem, So why do you think that there's this kind of intense phenomenon going on amongst young children now? And again, what are the triggers?
I think it's multifactorial. I don't think that you can say that there's any one cause. But to a large extent, I think, the difference that they're leading on social lives. There's a virtual world, there's a virtual life that they have on social media, and then there's their real life. So I think the difference between the two is so glaring. I think that is leading to a lot of anxiety and a lot of self-esteem related issues. Most people and teenagers are trying to project a life, a perfect life, whether it is a perfect life, perfect, perfect body, they're just trying to project that. And whereas obviously nobody's life can be perfect. So I think that contradiction in their mind, while wanting to project something, while wanting something and actually having something, I think that is creating a lot of probably low esteem issues. Why are we seeking perfection? Because there is no such thing as perfection.
When you're talking about perfection, I think like every generation, of course, wants attention, wants love, affirmation, but it's that sense of like that you can now put filters and actually create a perfect self. That technological intervention is weird, because earlier you can live with the desire to be a certain thing, but you don't actually see that projected, and then again look at yourself and say, oh, I'm not really like that. So amongst those children that we spoke of, from just feeling malaise, it's gone to hurting yourself, cutting yourself. When we were chatting before we started recording, you had used the word fashionable, and a lot of people do have that sense that now self-harm, expressing yourselves as depressed has become fashionable amongst the young. Will you help explain why you use that phrase?
I mean, I didn't mean it in a sense that to degrade what one is feeling. So not in that sense, but what I meant is that it's sort of become such a run-of-the-mill sort of thing that, I mean, so many kids you're hearing is like resorting to self-harm. Obviously, it is to seek attention, but why? As parents, we really need to understand that this is a cry for help, and why are we letting things go up to that extent where we are actually, letting it exceed that much? I mean, we need to put in interventions, we need to put in, mechanisms right earlier on so that it doesn't go that far also. Self-harm has become such a common thing nowadays that it's really horrific.
Right. There was this two very stark incidents recently in these months of COVID when there was the boys' locker room and the other boy who was accused of, I think they have a language called hookup, and they had a hookup and he was accused of molestation. 2 years later, he committed suicide. So, again, because you've been dealing with schools and young children, what are boys feeling? What's the boys aspect of it? Is there some sort of change in discourse that is needed over there as well?
I think that, in fact, the boys in this generation are far more respectable. I think there's a lot of equality, much more, that has come in. I think they are far more open, and I think they're quite all right with, girls sort of being more open about themselves also. We just come from a very different generation, and obviously they are in a very different generation. So the conversation is only very different.
I was actually asking in relation again to depression and suicide. I mean, relationship troubles have always been there, every generation, right? So why is the depression around even relationships intensified?
I think there's just so much that they are having to experience, so many more challenges that what they go through. And I think even in relationships, of course, there is a lot more of equality, but along with that, obviously adjustment wise also, then, there are not both ways. Both, I think the boys and the girls are not wanting to adjust as much as, say, maybe what in our generation we would have done. There's always two sides to a coin. So just as there is obviously much more equality and much more openness in a relationship, and therefore a lot more things are probably said, there are times when then either of them can't deal with that. And your expectations are also so much higher, right? Because you want a perfect relationship. You want a perfect partner. And then when the other person is, and naturally so, not living up to your built-in expectations, your perceived expectations, again, that brings about a fallout. So I think everything comes back to the fact that how we are just seeking this perfect world, and we can't have it. So even at that age, they're seeking life and relationship, everything to be perfect, which in their 13 or 14-year-old mind is shaped very differently, right? I mean, obviously.
So, Neerja, I mean, everything that we are speaking of right now is urban landscape and to a certain extent affluent landscape. But it's interesting that with Empower, you've set up a helpline. I believe you've had more than 60,000 phone calls seeking help in this post-COVID time. And it's from people from a lower economic strata, So I think this is the first time we're getting a window into that world. What was your biggest discoveries there? What is your team learning from this?
So, interestingly and quite shockingly, 80% of the callers have been males.
Wow.
And it continues to be so. I had thought that maybe initially it is and it'll settle. I mean, it'll change. But it continues to, have that kind of be in that ratio, which probably goes to tell us that obviously men also go through mental health issues. But because the helpline offers them anonymity, they're obviously feeling freer to be able to make that call. I mean, obviously they have their own stigma where mental health is perceived as a sign of weakness, and men are not supposed to be weak. So they obviously don't own up to it. So that to me was a huge, very, very telling statistic.
That's gigantic. I mean, 80% male is huge. So, when we were speaking about triggers, is there different triggers here? Is what they're sharing, or what is the source of their depression and anxiety in any way different from, say, what we were discussing earlier about a more urban affluent landscape?
No, I think more or less, human emotion remains the same. So we're basically seeing anxiety, depression, domestic relationship issues. Basically, these are the three main areas, three large buckets of concerns that we are seeing. So I think initially when lockdown had just started, that time we were getting a lot of concerns about work, because there was a lot of work issues and uncertainty, helplessness, where people were beginning to feel obviously very isolated. People who were living alone were finding it very difficult. So like we had a caller who called, and she just screamed on the phone because she said, I'm so I mean, she was so tired and so fed up of being alone that she literally just picked up the phone and she just screamed. So, we had various different sort of stories like that were coming up. And of course, people were very, very concerned about work. And obviously, relationship issues has actually increased over time, because I guess the more time you're spending at home, the more, it's becoming difficult.
Since it's a lower socioeconomic strata, how did people even know that this helpline is available?
The helpline was in collaboration with the BMC as well as the state government. They had also put out posts and notices and messages about the helpline, and that also helped for it to reach the numbers that it did, because most of our callers were from, of course, Mumbai is majority of it, but 70% of it has come from Maharashtra, which covers Goa, Pune, Nasik, Aurangabad, all those areas, and the remaining 30% is from the rest of the country.
I think you've just opened a window into that's a whole area where we're talking about absence of help here, or parents who say get on with it. I mean, the kind of absence of infrastructure and help, maybe they're making a call to your helpline, but there's no follow-up there, there's no therapy, there's no counseling, there's no safe space. So, that's a whole uncharted territory of ill health that one is looking at,
We've actually started an e-clinic pretty much for this reason. So we've opened it out to tier 2 cities in Maharashtra. So say Nasik, Aurangabad, Sholapur and Kolhapur. So 4 places. It's still not really picked up as much as I would have thought it would. But I think we'll get there. I mean, I'm realizing that anything new in this space of mental health takes a little while to, for people to really understand it. Then a few people try it. Then it starts spreading by word of mouth. So we've just launched it about 2 months ago. We've not yet had a very good response to it, but I'm going to hold on to that. I'm not in a hurry to spell its failure. So we're going to hold on to it. And I'm very sure that in the next 6 months, we'll probably start seeing a trajectory there.
So, Neerja, as we are speaking about lower economic strata, and you're saying that the range of emotions is the same, though the triggers might be different. But there's a whole other area, which again, you've been interested in, which is of corporate mental health, and the figures there again are really stark. I think it's 48% of people in the corporate world who are suffering from mental health. So can you explain what has been your experience there?
So, initially when we started, I had this, which I feel was really foolish now. So I thought that corporates and schools will be very easy to crack. So I knew that we were dealing with a very highly stigmatized topic, but somehow I thought in my naivety that schools will be very easy to crack, because it's an educated lot. Educated in the sense that people are aware, they know what they're dealing with, and they will definitely want solutions. And corporates was the other one that I thought that, here that this high achieving individuals, very well structured. And again, if they are grappling with issues, they'll want to do it. But I was sadly mistaken. And that came as a huge shock to me. I mean, it really honestly left me very disillusioned initially, because corporates just refused to acknowledge it. So for the first couple of months, I couldn't understand that why they're not acknowledging it. I mean, they were just not willing to, they were not willing to even sort of come on the table to talk about it, let alone anything else. And then getting conversions was another ballgame. So even if we were to approach a corporate, they just kind of go round and round in circles, say yes, 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 but, never get back. So it just came as a real shock. And we realized as a team more and more that, they just don't want to accept and acknowledge that, yes, there could be an issue, because that would mean, again, it keeps going back to a stigma. And that self-perceived stigma, because acknowledging that there's a mental health concern would mean that, which means that, we're not doing our job well. We are a group of weak individuals. Therefore, we are having an issue. So let's not acknowledge only that there is a problem. So from there to here now, where of course corporates are more and more open to it. We have more and more people wanting to talk about it. So we have people now, because we've got a couple of people now collaborating with us for the helpline, people who are wanting to take on longer term longitudinal mental health intervention programs, so that awareness is creeping in and the acknowledgement is creeping in. So I think, I think if I may say so, we've done a fairly decent job in 5 years, from absolute no to at least, okay, let's look at it.
So in the workshop that you're, trying to get corporates to buy into, what are the parameters of what you're trying to create or inculcate into corporates?
So basically we're calling it an OASIS, so we're trying to create that, the openness, the acknowledgement, the support system, the intervention, and, and basically creating a safe space. Because the minute you create a safe space and you let your employee know that if he or she comes, is sort of coming out with it or saying that, yes, I have a mental health concern, it should not reflect on his compensation, it should not reflect on the work that you're giving him to. It should not reflect on perceptions being changed. So you need to create that safe space, like a safe haven. So we're trying to focus on actually creating the awareness and then making it a safe space for acknowledgement. Right. And that has to start from top down.
So I did ask you this once before, but almost a year has passed in between. So have you had a buy-in from your husband's company?
Yes, actually. So he is, of course, totally sold on it. But yeah, it's work in progress. Like I said, everybody takes a little time to come to terms, to, come on the table with you. So some of them are much more open than the others. But I think it's work in progress. And I'm sure we'll get there soon.
So, when we were speaking about interventions, people don't even know whether to seek a counselor or a psychotherapist, or is it physiological, is it emotional, So I again want to start with you first and then look at the broader picture. That is there any practice? Is it counseling? Is it therapy? Like, have you ever had therapy yourself?
So, I very often think that, I don't think there's anything wrong in going to a therapist, because I feel it's like just, just offloading. Sometimes you just need to vent. And I feel that just talking also just puts things in perspective. So I have very often thought of actually going to a therapist, but no, I've really not landed up doing that. But also because, I sort of spend a lot of time exercising. So for me, that is therapeutic. I think anything that is therapeutic is what you need to do. So for some people, going to a therapist is therapeutic. You must certainly do that. For me, spending time in, say, exercising or in the outdoors, I cycle a lot. I really enjoy that. That is therapeutic to me. Just being with myself, just my thoughts, that really helps me. Listening to music, spending time with, say, a few close friends, spending time with the family. I started cooking during COVID, something that I've never done before. I find that very therapeutic. I think just cleaning up drawers and the, cupboards, that I find very therapeutic. So I think, whatever works for you is therapeutic. Some people, like, I really enjoy doing Legos. I find that very therapeutic. I do yoga very regularly, and I also meditate. I follow a spiritual practice. So I think if, going to a therapist, if you really, I'm just saying in the normal course, even if you don't have a mental health concern, and if going to a therapist is what works for you, then you must certainly do it.
So now, if for others listening in, what is it that at an individual level one can do? Suppose someone doesn't want to seek help and they're suffering. What are you supposed to do? What are the protocols? So there's one, just depression, someone seeming low, that's one thing. Others may be at a more extreme end of the spectrum and they're still not seeking help. What is the protocols involved?
Obviously, talking would be the first thing that you would do as a friend, because you would want to reach out and just listen to the person in a very non-judgmental fashion. I think what a lot of us tend to do, or most people tend to do, is jump into an advisory role. Do this, do that. But a lot of times the other person doesn't want to hear that. You just want to just be heard without being judged, of course, without advice being thrown back at you. So maybe one of the first things you could do is just be a good listener. And then, of course, depending on the severity of the issue and the severity of the situation, then recommend seeking help. A lot of times people don't want to seek help, They know that they're suffering, but they just feel that, it'll just become all right. Or, by doing X, Y, Z, it'll pass away.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you feel that it is not, then I think the best, as a friend, what you can do is gently keep nudging the person that, why don't you seek help?
So can you just, you have actually already spoken a bit about it, but I just want to address it with clarity, that there's a definite, even amongst the young, even amongst this teenage group that we're talking about, and definitely in older generation, the sense that now that it's opening up, this whole conversation about seeking help, it's already tipping over into a culture of self-indulgence. Oh, I'm depressed, I need help. And so there's a lot of mocking around it already, and there's something to be, or is there something to be said between being robust and like having a sense that you can get on top of something and immediately feeling, I can't deal with this, I need someone else's help. What's the health line there? And is there any way of articulating?
Obviously, see, I feel that sort of a thing will always happen, in the sense there will be people who will use this as an escapism. But that you are the best judge to know that. And as a parent, obviously, you'll have to judge that. And that's where the fine balance will come about. Because there are people who are really suffering out there and who are really waging a daily war. You're really fighting a war every single day in your mind.
Yeah.
So that's the difficult part in this, right? Because it's not so overt. There is no way to, there's no blood test to say that, yes, your level is 20 and therefore you are or you're not. That's why this becomes so tricky, this whole thing, right? Of where do you draw the line? When do you know it's a red flag? When do you seek help? So the lines are a little blurred, and that is what increases the challenge. I think mental health is honestly a pandemic that we're sitting on. We're on the verge of one big outbreak, and I think one really needs to look at it. And I think all of us, not only we in India, I think all over, world over, we need to look at it as a global phenomena and need to address it.
If you were to use your influence to create one big sea change, what would it be?
One sea change would be very difficult to really
100 sea changes.
There'd be couple. Capacity building is one very big area that one would need to look into, and then creating awareness so that people are more aware and then wanting to seek help. So that's you would close the circle.
I just want to end on a hopeful note. On a scale of 1 to 10, how high are chances of recovery?
I think 100%. So when you say about recovery, there could be two types, right? One is where you've had an episode and say you've had to take medication or whatever, or therapy, and you're completely out of it and you're fine. That could be one recovery. And another recovery could be that, yes, you got to be on medication, but you can still have a completely fulfilled and 100% productive life. There is no reason for you not to lead a fulfilled life.
Thank you so much, Neerja.
Thank you very much.